He's very.
All right, we're live.
He's very stubborn.
Now we're live. All right. First and foremost, if we have visual problems today, what I'm going to do is I will just quickly restart a new stream. So if you're watching and it goes out, hang tight, and in a minute or two we'll be back. I don't know what happened last week, never happened before, and hopefully it never happens again.
Well, and you know, outside the house pulling the cord, making it go out.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe we got too deep and YouTube cut us off. I don't know. But we're back with episode 22 today. Our guest today, Pastor Brad Haws, pastor of UTC in Denver, the Round Church, as it is known, the Round Church. And he's been pastor other places, at least one other place, which I'll let him tell you about. But and it's not all out here at church. I've had since we were in high school, and then church services a little bit. I mean, he's very, very dedicated to his trade, but there's more to him than that. And before we go any further, I would like to thank him and his church for allowing me in October to use at least the parking lot area for a free food giveaway. So I didn't want to forget to thank you and them, whoever was voting on that or agreeing to it. So anyway,
what is the date on that? And
October 22nd, from 11 in the morning till whenever the food runs out. We're hoping, we're going to at least have 500 meals. If we come up with some more fundage between now and then, we might have more than that. But so 6 meals per vehicle. I think we're going to cut it off. I mean, I don't want some guy taking 100 and going up the street and selling them. You know, that's not the idea. Yeah. But anyway, that is.
You sign up for
you show up. You show up, and from what I understand from people who've done this type of thing, it doesn't take long to get rid of the food. So don't show up at 3:00 and expect to get a pulled pork meal. No. And that's what the meal's going to be, pulled pork. All right. So Brad, like I said, I've known him since at least probably high school, not before. Grew up in Reinholds, which for those that don't know is just a little north of the North Denver hood.
Exactly. It's a hood in its own.
It may even be a little hoodier than North Denver.
It is. It was. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, very quick, actually, why he is on this podcast, to be honest, is he kept bugging me about doing a podcast about him and his buddies on some little trip. We're trying to distinguish what determines a song to be considered classic rock, and that I ought to do a podcast about it. So I said, all right, dude, we were open this Friday. He had vacation. Come on, we'll get that off your bucket list. Now, I assume this part of the discussion is going to take about 5 minutes, and then we'll get into better stuff. But anyway,
we don't have to discuss.
You wanted to talk about this. We're talking about
was interesting.
We're getting it out of the way. I looked it up this morning, and I am now of the firm belief that classic rock has nothing to do with how good a song was. Possibly a little bit about the era it was made in, but more so just the style of music. Like Bon Jovi, the example is more pop rock. I would put Bob Dylan in a folk rock class.
All right.
What's your opinion?
Well, let me just say, this is a 4 buddies sitting on a boat on Lake Wallenpaupack with the music in the background and suddenly have this conveation. Actually,
music on your boat or on the shore playing that you heard?
No, it was on the boat. Okay. On the boat, background music while we're just hanging out. And we had it on a classic rock station, and I posed the question because I had watched a documentary that was trying to attempt to answer that question. It seems like an obvious answer. And 2.5 hours later, we weren't really sure.
Yeah.
And 2 of these guys, myself, not one of them, 2 of the 4, I would say are like senseis. I mean, they were actually in bands. They know, I like music. I love a lot of music. I can hold my own talking about it, but I mean, I'm not like an expert. Those guys are more experts. And we had this very interesting conversation. And we kind of had to ask ourselves, it's like a 25-year-old, or let's say a 30-year-old. They're going to say, well, classic rock to them is something they grew up with, a kind of song, because it's
That's not
like if
the
you say a
case.
classic car, 25 years old is a classic car. So 25 years from now would be what, the 90s or whatever.
But even
But it's
cars,
not.
I don't think every old car is a classic.
No, I think with cars, maybe if you look it up, it doesn't matter. If it's 25 years, it's a classic. Like you can
Well,
get
maybe as
classic
far as
tags.
the classic tags,
You can register as
you can
tags.
register,
Right,
yeah.
right.
because somebody, when I did actually research a little of this morning, it equated it to cars, and it brought up like the some songs from the 50s, the teeny weeny purple polka dot bikini. Obviously, a song well remembered, not considered classic, and it's made the statement that there's a difference between being classic and being antique.
Exactly. So you call those songs from like the 50s those old ones, right? I mean, if you're a classic rock station, there's a particular type of music you're
Again, it's based on the style of music, not
exactly
whether it was a popular song or not.
So we kind of looked at this and we're like, okay, where to start? And I think we two songs that probably began the classic rock sound and genre, and that would have been the songs that when you look at any kind of poll they've done over the years, what's the greatest song of all time?
Right.
It's typically three songs that are always in these top three things. It's either I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Stones, Like a Rolling Stone by Dylan, or Hey Jude by the Beatles. So we kind of went back to where did those start? And if you go back to 1965, and I Can't Get No Satisfaction came out, and Like a Rolling Stone came out. Now, if you look at the albums those two songs were on, I Can't Get No Satisfaction is on an album. Most of it is like R&B, which is what the Stones started out.
Right.
So not classic rock.
No.
It's blues.
Right.
But that song kind of has a sound that started to turn around. Like Rolling Stone, Dylan, like you said, folk rock. But Like a Rolling Stone is not a folky song, so it's the rock genre with some guitar.
What I gathered, it again depends on the type of instruments used and the sound more so than the words.
Right. So when we took that and we kind of started there became like two more. One was like once a keyboard takes over, then it starts to get less and less of a classic rock sound. More started after like 1980. You start to get the new wave sound. The other thing we said was if there's a couple other things we kind of came up with. If the song came after they're already classic rock formatted stations, it won't be classic rock because classic rock already
But it should be able to if it uses the criteria.
You would think, but we also said if it appeared on MTV, not classic rock. So just like we said, Aerosmith, Dream On, classic rock. Love in an Elevator, not so much.
No,
Same group,
right?
Similar. There's a sound there that changes a bit, but we're not calling that it's not classic rock.
Oh, right. I mean, and any band could play one song classic rock, one disco song, one
they could
gospel song. I mean,
they certainly could.
So it really isn't band specific.
It isn't because it can change.
It
definitely
isn't. I don't think the words have a whole lot to do with whether it's classic or not. Right. I don't know that record sales have anything to do. It's basically the sound of the song and the instruments used.
What we thought too was what happened between 64 and like 79 is you had rock music kind of period. So you had a bunch of genres. So like Black Sabbath, classic rock, but it's heavy metal.
Yeah.
But at that time, all that stuff came out and took like this classic rock format that you hear on a radio of classic rock. But then after, again, like 79, 80, once MTV took over, then you started getting all these different, then they were determined by these different genres. Now you had new wave, you started to have different kinds of genres that people talk about. Hair bands, 80s glam bands, that kind of stuff. So back here, there may be a variety of genres, but they were all kind of, so again, Stairway to Heaven is a song that's, again, if I ask you guys what do you think is the epitome of a classic rock song, what would you say?
Yeah, that would probably be right up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think most of the time you're going to say Stairway to Heaven, Freebird.
But Freebird's not classic rock, I don't think.
Oh, but any station that plays classic rock is going to place that.
Yeah.
That's Southern rock.
Right.
But that Southern rock stuff started between 64.
So basically, you got classic rock that can then be divvied into Southern rock.
Because at the time they kind of did that. It's what we like. We went back from got off the boat. We go back and we looked up like one of these, classic rock stations will do those at July 4th for the weekend.
Countdown.
500. Here are 500 songs. So we tried to look, and so when we say these are classic rock songs, and what was interesting was there was, I think, Stairway to Heaven and Freebird like 2 and 3.
Yeah. But what was number one?
Number 1, Peter Frampton.
And I wouldn't say that's hard. Or
Peter Frampton, one of those live songs. I forget. Do you feel?
Yeah. And I wouldn't call that.
But that was number 1. But that was classic rock. So
see, but those polls are. I mean, people are voting, and again, it's based on the popularity of the song, not. I mean, and there's songs in them 100 that aren't classic rock.
But understand, these are songs that classic rock station.
Well, right.
Just like we had a heart. So here we are, the Beatles.
Not classic rock.
You're in my exactly. But every classic rock station is going to say the Beatles are classic rock.
No,
but they're more like that pop thing.
Yeah.
So that was. See, we've already gone beyond 5 minutes on this, Paul. And he thought that's all it takes. This is a great bar conversation that you have with people for a while.
Well, but it's very subjective. But I think
it is subjective. I'm not saying I'm not.
But I think a lot of people get confused between classic rock style and songs that were classic songs.
That's another good thing.
Is it arbitrary?
Oh, it is. I mean,
there is no, top person who makes that decision.
1 second here. We got somebody that said we ought to check our audio. Now, according to my little gauge there, the audio should be okay. I mean, I see it moving as we talk, so I don't know if that's an issue or not. I don't know that I can even do anything as far as turning it up. I think that's just on my end if my computer makes a noise. So anyway, we're going to keep going.
But feel free to chime in.
Yeah, chime in if you can't hear, but I have nothing set up different than and we were always loud and clear. It was a video we had an issue with.
Maybe it's me. Maybe
I'm
too
your
mumbling.
voices. Yeah, maybe you're mumbling.
So there is no person or organization that says these are your classic.
Right.
There is not. It's very hard.
It's a radio format.
A radio station, the director is going to decide, okay, we're going to have a weekend of classic, and I'm going to pick all these songs, and in his mind, that's what it is.
Yeah, and that's very true. So, like I said, it was and I know Kelly Roy enjoys classic rock. If you look around here, you see all that. Yeah. And I thought, well, that was an interesting conversation. And we kept thinking the whole time we're doing it, man, this would make a good podcast. So that's why I told him. I didn't say I got to be the guy to talk about it. I just that would be something that I think you might get response from to people because afterwards I've asked people that question. Yeah, what do you think? And man, it goes like wildfire to talk about it.
Some discussions are like that. They just
So
all right, message on there is apparently every now and then it's a little sketchy, but it's Anna Ruth who was on last week said she thinks it's more of an internet issue, like just every man has a little glitch. I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna mess with nothing now. We're gonna go ahead, and I mean they're here. All right. So then back to like.
Even go back even further. Okay.
There's not a lot. There's not a lot. I guess it would intrigue anybody.
I went to get calico. I grew up in Reinholds, and I, just a great time being a kid in a little town like.
Do you remember a kid, the train going through there?
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I live right off from the
Yeah.
train, so we could walk to the train track in 15 seconds.
Yeah.
It was right there, and so
Good memories there.
really good. We played a lot of basketball in Reinholds. We had a basketball rim on our barn, and everybody came to our place to play basketball.
Okay.
Literally any time of day. There were times when my parents were away on trips, and at 3:00 in the morning we'd be hanging out playing basketball in town. And our basketball court was literally in the back alley.
It was in an alley.
And around the corner from our court was the Reinholds Attic Association. And then down the street was the Reinholds Hotel, which still exists. The AC does not exist.
Right.
But is an alley in which we played our games, and all night long we'd be playing, and just people would be driving or walking or stumbling through our games all night.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was like a town with a lot of characters. You could have turned
Yeah, there
you
was
could have
a lot
turned
of
a setting
people.
into a sitcom.
Yeah,
Because
really.
It was just interesting people, and we just had interesting.
And the
Interesting
AC at Christmas used to have a guy with Santa, and he'd be wandering in the alley. Not sure where he was.
There'd be a bunch of guys dressed as Santa, is what it was.
Okay.
You might recall the one day we were playing. We actually were sitting around in my dad's shop that was there in the alley, and a bunch of us were hanging out playing Monopoly. And then one of the local guys comes walking in and says, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Don't you know what's going on out here?" And one of the Santa Clauses came back having a little bit too much celebration and decided to get ticked off at a guy who was trying to back his vehicle into his garage area and drove and rammed into him. So, yeah, but it was fun. I mean, I have just almost all great memories growing up in a town like that.
Yeah.
I can go into any town or city and feel comfortable driving around, knowing that I can get around anything because I understand alley systems.
Yeah.
Once you got alleys that you hang out with.
Yeah, that's a good. Yep.
But,
Yep.
it was in those days of riding bike. Everywhere you went, we go down the creek and fish and get crayfish and whatever.
Did the train stop there?
Probably in the older days.
It did, because the Reinholds Lumber Company was there.
Oh, well,
Yeah, so they would drop
Okay.
stuff off at the
did.
lumber yard, and
Yeah.
there was and early on there was a coal the feed mill. The Reinholds feed mill was there, and he had
Okay.
coal and he had feed, and they drop off. So that was still a drop off point.
Did you ever have guys jump off the train? I said like homeless, the ones that were going
Hobos.
Right, the hobos.
Hobos, yes.
I don't think anymore at my time. I know my grandmother would speak about that frequently because she lived there on Main Street. My mom grew up on Main Street, so there were those guys would come off, and there's the old stories of them having markings different places, so they could tell you which houses to go to that might
were
feed
safe.
you. And,
Yeah.
and there was some of that in Reinhold. I would love, and I know there's people. In fact, I think this weekend they have their big folk art sale in Reinholds at the at the chapel. So I know there's some people who've done a bit of history about the town. I just find the town kind of fascinating because I always assumed it kind of started as a result of being a spot for the train.
Yes, that's all.
I was always told that there would be passenger trains that would get off in Reinholds and then they would go up to Galen Hall.
Oh,
when Galen Hall was still a resort area.
Yeah.
And so back in the turn of the 20th century, in that time period, that supposedly is what would happen. What I find interesting is, now I grew up at Swamp UCC Church. So if you know where Swamp Church is, it's out
behind Country Corner.
Behind Country Corner, at the foot of the Gale Mountain, and Texter Mountains, and all that. So I still find it fascinating. That church started in 1764. But Reinholds as a village, I think, only organized in like 1900 or right before that. So I'm still fascinated as to who went to that church and how they found it, because it's
Okay.
back.
Right. It's
nowhere.
not even in
Way
the
out
middle of
there.
what
You know,
would have been a little village at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if 897 was some sort of thoroughfare, a dirt thoroughfare for something, you'd still have to go off of it just a little bit to go back to Swamp. And it still intrigues me as to who those people were. And it was kind of a big church, a big German Reformed church. So,
Where did it get its name?
I used to know that kind of thing. I'm not sure.
Maybe that's just some of the
Swampy area back
history
there, but-
of how it began. I
Yeah.
don't know, how that.
Well, it must have been, because there's Swamp Bridge Road, Swamp
Right.
Church.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I assume it
just the
was a little
swamp.
mushy back there.
Mushy.
A little mushy
A
back
little
there.
mushy back there.
Yeah, it was a little
Yeah.
mushy. That's funny. Yeah. So as you grew up, and this was something that I remember as a kid, and you talked about Galen Hall and that whole area of the mountain, you being very close to it growing up. The meat locker.
The meat locker. Sure.
I
You
one
ever
time
been-
played cards in the meat locker.
You actually went in. I
We-
walked
one
to the
night,
door. I didn't.
We weren't
walk
in long,
Yep.
but we did go in one time,
Okay.
very briefly.
I'll never forget a night when Kelly, the way I kind of got to know Kelly was when I was in 10th grade, you were out of school. And
Yeah,
there was
yeah.
a big group of guys
Right.
who still were in the area, hung out, and
Had
Just-
no women. We had
Had
nothing
no
to
women.
do. Let's throw
today
around.
today they would be called losers,
Yeah.
but
Well,
At
back
that
then
time,
we were known as
they
losers.
might have been the first of the losers. But they all hung out together, and my brother was part of that group. And somehow, again, I think the basketball thing, that was one of the things that kind of came to my house. We'd play a lot of basketball. We put
Super Bowl parties.
Super Bowl parties. We put weights up in the top of our garage.
Yes.
And
Paradise Alley.
we had Paradise Alley where we lifted weights. So it was kind of a hangout. And these guys were older. And so at that time, I admired them. I thought they were kind of cool guys. And I hung out with them. And I hung out a lot with Kelly. But I always remember one night, these guys, I was not along, but they all ended up coming to our house. It was great. They were just walking.
It was really the weirdest thing. But I mean, being a parent, having some kids, I would have never put up with the shit. But his parents and Jenny Sebastian, we could show up anytime, walk right in, never have to knock, hang out. Basically, I'm sure be pain in the asses. Well, I mean, we behaved ourselves. Honestly, I will say this: whatever we did, wherever we did it, when we were at those places or stopped in, we all were smart enough to understand how nice it was to be able. So we never stepped over that boundary. Nobody ever did anything stupid.
No.
But again, it truly is amazing how we could just do that.
Yeah.
I mean,
that was just a great thing to grow up with. And I had, my parents had very little problem with just hosting all these guys all the time, hanging out.
And as a matter of fact, I think they sort of, from time to time, found it amusing and livened up their life a little bit. I mean, his dad, Johnny, used to take us, we'd all pile in a carpet van and he'd take us to basketball games all over the place.
Yeah.
Like, and it was really, I mean, it was great. I mean,
So how did you end up with a meat locker then?
well, that was just one little night.
But I was going to say, that was a night that you guys came back to our house and came walking in. You were literally a little unhinged. Because if you remember, I don't know if you remember this, because it kind of created a little slogan. They were going up there and they couldn't find their way, and they were looking, I think, for the meat locker, and every turn they took, they eventually would end up at Wernersville at the state hospital. So they came back petrified, like every road leads to the state hospital, Wernersville. It's just the funniest thing. I always remember that.
Well, wasn't that part of the story that somebody got loose from that
Yeah, that was-
hospital?
well, yeah,
And that was
always
part of the meat locker,
escapees.
and that was.
And there was also up there, and for the life of me, I don't think I could find it today, but up near the Texter Mountains, tiny town.
Yes, there is a time. Yes, I think we went up there one time.
I've been through it a couple times
I
at
couldn't
night,
tell you
and
what
it
it
is
is
the
either.
weirdest thing, especially at night. I don't know what it looks like in the day, but it's like you're going through this little village where everything is miniature.
Yeah.
But it's people's houses.
Yeah, it was something odd.
It was weird.
Hmm.
I would like to maybe try and, but I don't even know how you would begin to even get. I'd have to drive all over and hope to just stumble.
I navigate up there a little bit every once in a while with my hospice job. I get in that territory, but I don't know which roads lead to what anymore.
Yeah, no, it was a
funny.
long time. A long time
You'd
ago.
have to ask Alexa. I'm sure she would. Ask Alexa.
And if you think it was hot out like yesterday, today, if you lifted weights on the top of that barn in the summer, you haven't really experienced hot.
Speaking of classic rock, we have my dad's old
standing console kind of,
and we played radio. And then Ron Peltz hooked up a speaker on the peak of the barn.
Yeah,
and we played basketball, and we would play basketball tunes all the time. We just
it was really it was great times. Yeah. No worries, not a whole lot of worries.
There really wasn't a whole lot going on.
Well, no, that really wasn't. So then he leaves and goes to Messiah College. And like I said, I mean, you never in your life, I don't know that you ever thought about doing anything else but being a pastor. And
we would call it a calling. Sunday morning in my Sunday school, I was like in 8th grade or something. We went to Sunday school every Sunday, and a teacher, she just read out of a book.
Right.
And I just kind of paid attention, and I sort of heard, maybe for that first time, as you would say, really what this Christian faith was about, and sort of believing in Jesus and just kind of trusting in that. And I remember at Swamp Church, there was the church, and then there was the Sunday school Christian education building was separate from the church. But I remember, I can still think of this, and I looked out the window at the church building, and I remember just having this kind of voice in my head sort of say, you got to remind people that this is what it's about. You got to remind Christians that this is what it's about. And from that point on, I just felt like that's what I'm supposed to do. And back then, I didn't know any other avenue than becoming a pastor. So just felt like that's what I'm supposed to do, is to just keep reminding people, particularly people who profess to be church and Christian people, hey, it's about Jesus. And so I think that's what I've just always kind of done for those years. So I went to Messiah as a religion major, went to Lancaster Theological Seminary, got my master's degree in divinity, and then I became a pastor at St. John's Church out in East Earl. And I was there for 25 years, and then just kind of felt like my time here is done, and felt I had to get into our church's interim ministry, which is where you're a pastor of churches that don't have pastor position.
Yeah.
Kind of help them through that process. So I did that down in Limerick in Montgomery County for 16 months, and they got a pastor. And then St. John's in Denver was in a similar position in a transition time and asked me to come and do that interim work. And in the process, they realized they weren't really sure what they're doing, what they want to do, who they want to be. They have a large daycare down there, Calico Care Center. And I think like many mainline churches, just going through that diminishing of church attendance, but having this thriving care center. So when I came there, we kind of had to ask the question, are we a church with a care center, or are we a care center with a church? Go back and forth on that. But I became what's called a designated pastor there, which meant now instead of helping them kind of transition to a new pastor, I'm going to help them sort of figure some things out before they're ready for a new pastor. So that was that was a 3-year process. And then at the end of that, they kind of said, would you be willing to kind of now continue with us and move forward? So that's the position I'm at now as the settled pastor there. So
now you also do hospice.
Right. So in the course of becoming that interim pastor down in Limerick, that was like a 3/4 time position. So I'm still not of retirement age. So I'm like, I need something else. And another pastor friend of mine was doing hospice chaplaincy, and he said, hey, our company, really needs what we call spiritual care coordinators. We need somebody because we're losing a few, and we need them per diem, part time. So I applied, and it's something that I again fit into my calling, not in terms of telling people about Jesus as much as just being a pastor to people, just kind of walking with people, obviously through a difficult time. And so I've been doing that for almost 6 years for Medic, a hospice which is based in Wyomissing, and we serve Berks, Lebanon, and Schuylkill counties. So I do that a few days a week, and I do a lot of on call for them, overnight on call. We always have somebody on call for support, and then weekends. So just do a lot of that as well.
Yeah, the hospice organization that, when my grandmother passed,
Yes.
they had, and what I learned was when I took her from an apartment into full care at Luther Acres, that hospice, when I met with them, is that we want to be involved way before it's time for her to pass. They want to, which was surprising to me. I was like, well, I always thought of hospice as in the last 2 days,
Right.
days.
Yeah.
But that isn't, am I correct in saying that? Because that was what the impression that I got was we want to, and her health turned around and she did very good for another like 4 years. And a hospice would come in and do what they needed to do, and then they would back off a little when she was feeling better, but they would still have their hand in it. You have your own nurses. You have, not only did the home have nurses, you guys came in, and the last 2 weeks that she was with us, the pastor that came in for her hospice was absolutely awesome. Absolutely amazing. What that organization does is really cool. They Grandma liked the harps. They got 2 girls to come in with a harp and play. And Grandma at that point was unconscious, but she was hearing it.
She was hearing it.
It was amazing. You're bringing this big harp in, and they're playing like it was really cool. And that was all hospice. So
we have a music therapist. She does not have a harp. She's got a guitar. But it's like you said. The thing that probably people don't fully get about hospice is once, and I'm just a spiritual care coordinator, so I don't always have those things correct, but once a doctor has kind of determined that without any further intervention, there's probably like a 6 month. It could be a 6 week, but at least at most maybe a 6 month period of time here that you're going to survive. And so at that point, if the decision is we're not going to do any further intervention, we don't really want to go to the hospital anymore, we don't want any more tubes, we don't want any more treatment, then you're eligible for hospice. The physician's prescribed hospice. It is a prescription. You just can't call hospice.
Oh, really?
They want you to come. You have to get a prescription for hospice. But once that's done and you're determined to be eligible, you can get hospice care. And there are so many families. I mean, that's one of the things I've heard so frequently. Wow, we should have brought you guys in much sooner.
Yeah, we were lucky. We got them in really early. Now she was 111, and she was totally with it all the way through.
Oh, she was 111.
111 when she passed, and she was with it all up in time. At the end of the last week, maybe 2 weeks, that she was kind of unconscious. But she was teaching classes at the home. Yeah. But you're right, there wasn't going to be any intervention. Like if something would happen. At 111, it wasn't going to happen. So that was, I guess, opened the door.
Exactly.
And
exactly. Most people don't stay on hospice for 4 years, although we have some, because hospice is, it's one of your Medicare benefits. So what can happen is if a person sort of stabilizes and you can't show that there's decline. Then Medicare is not going to pay for hospice if there's no decline. So then you kind of transition out.
Right.
Although you can come back in again.
And that's what she did. She was in,
So, but a lot of folks don't realize that you do get that extra hand, especially if you're helping. So if you're caring for somebody in your home, that's where it's especially helpful that you can get a nurse that comes and checks on them. You can get aides, and then you have the support of a spiritual care coordinator, music therapist, a social worker. They can all be involved in that for a longer period than just the last 2 days. So it's it's been a very rewarding, interesting position to hold and be a part of.
All right, now I got to ask you, in your hospice, have you had anybody that had a near-death experience or a he's looking for rum.
Here
Well, no, because
comes the train.
I myself, actually, I want to say this. I myself, and this is, he'll know exactly what I'm talking. In my life, I had what I consider 2 near-death experiences. One, I ruptured my spleen,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and the other one, I was in his Green Maverick. He was known for his. I will say this: the guy has never, as far as I know, drank a sip of alcohol or did any kind of drug, and it's damn good he didn't, because he was enough of a maniac without any intervention. But he used to drive like an idiot, basically. Like, I don't know why anybody even got in the car with him.
My wife thinks I drive like an idiot now.
And she probably don't know the half of it.
Yesterday.
But he had this old Green Maverick. And coming from Stevens into Ephrata, the back way past the Ephrata Mennonite School, the little bridge over Indian Run used to be like a hump.
Or a launching pad.
Yeah, not flat like it is today. And we're coming down that hill one time. It wasn't at night even. It was in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going, I don't know, probably 110 miles.
That's not true. That's not true.
It felt
70, I think it probably would have shook apart. It was an old Ford Maverick.
So we're going down through there, and he knows this hump's there, but isn't slowing down. And we go over that hump, like I'm hanging onto the dash, like sort of duck down, preparing for impact. And we fly over this hump. And honest to God,
this is true.
This is true.
We both can say this.
We fly over this hump, and I'm like this, and I probably 3 to 5 seconds. Nothing happens. Nothing. And I sat up and I said, "Damn, that wasn't even bad." And we hit the ground.
Dukes of Hazzard moment.
Yeah, but it was like we were in a. It seemed like we were in another zone. Like
it was paranormal for a moment.
It was a little bit like we almost went through some wormhole.
There's a good chance our trajectory of life did change. Maybe we were going some whole other thing, and we are now in a different pattern since that day.
Wow.
So anyway, that being what it was, but I'm because I had my own little experience when I ruptured my spleen. I'm very, very curious of other people who, when my dad passed away, and I miss my dad, but sort of a little selfish. I mean, I'm glad he passed away and didn't live as a vegetable or whatever, but a little bit of me wanted him to be able to say what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Just to have somebody, and there's millions of people. I watch shows on this. I look it up on the internet, but I never sat face to face with anybody that could, maybe for fear of being considered nuts, or they just didn't experience it. But it was, so I was just interested if anybody of a patient or whatever you call them in hospice did temporarily die and come back and have anything to say about it. And maybe if they did, maybe you're not even allowed to, maybe that's a HIPAA thing. HIPAA was a question last night.
Yeah, it was.
But what the letters mean, what the letters mean.
I don't even know myself.
Yeah, we got it wrong.
But anyway.
I don't think in my time I've had that. No one has.
And you've had nobody in your entire preaching career come to you and say, "Brad."
I have, and to be honest, right at the moment, had you prompt me for that, I would have kind of tried to think back and see. I know I've had some of that. And,
okay.
And I would say, for his sake, if you're out there listening and you've had one, call him. He's looking for people. I'd love to have you on here.
But don't really call me. Show up here. We'll talk in person. Either here, Black Forest, wherever. Yeah. But don't call me. I hate talking on the phone. But
I will say what I have found with hospice, and as a pastor, I've been, and I say these words, and I mean this, and I say this to families. I've had the privilege of being with people at the end of life. There's just something about it's a sad time, it's a painful time. It can have all sorts of emotions, but to be with someone as that happens, there's something about that that's just powerful. But I've seen things that just are, we tell folks this,
like
Like the whole
they're-
deal of somebody, somebody lingering for days, weeks, having not eaten, and you're like, our nurses have no clue why are they still there.
Right.
We got no idea. And then, the son from California walks in, and within an hour,
Yes.
they're gone. Or the opposite,
Yeah.
where this room is full of family for the
Yeah.
last week and a half. They just don't want to be by her. And then they finally all go take a shower.
Yeah.
And mom dies kind of like saying, look, I didn't want you here.
No.
You know,
Yeah. Oh,
we've seen enough of that.
Yeah.
I had those experience where I went to a gentleman and prayed. I was made aware, like he was Catholic in his faith, so I prayed over him, and I did the sign of the cross on his forehead, and that was it. And almost as though
They were picking their.
I was waiting for that. I needed that.
Yeah.
A few kind of dramatic kind of
Yeah.
things. I had a woman from my former church that it was just the most amazing in a hospice facility, and dying of cancer. And I came in, her family was there, her husband, her daughters, and they were all gathered around. And I came not knowing that things had taken a turn. And so I came in, and they're all tearful, and she's laying there, and they said, oh, hey, Brad's here. And she kind of moaned, and I saddled up next to her, and we all gathered, and I prayed. And when I said amen, she sighed, and that was it. And now, this day, every one of those folks is guaranteeing you that she was waiting for her pastor to come in that room, do what he does. And that was it. And, I have no proof of any of this.
Right.
But I've had enough of those experiences to say there are instances where something's going on. And likewise, I will never discount someone's near death or coming back from the dead kind of experience.
No.
I believe
and mine was very short-lived. I did not see Jesus. I did not see anything. But when I was above myself in that hospital, it was the most peaceful. You can't describe it. Like, I can say it was peaceful, it was loving, but it doesn't describe it. And like I've said many times, I think that's why sometimes here on earth I get a little frustrated, because I long for that feeling that I'll never get here. And it's another. And I don't. This is not anti-church, but when I go to church, I find it. I'm going to say I find it boring. I find it hard to. I find it almost like I see pastors like you trying to tell this group of people, don't do that, but generally believe in Jesus, trust in Jesus. Even me, who saw a little bit of the place, it's impossible to describe it. It's frustrating to me that you want to tell them what it's like, but even I couldn't, because even though I experienced a small bit of it, so I sit there and it is almost not agonizing, but it's hard for me to sit there knowing what you're trying to pass along, that I got to see a little bit of, but nobody out there did. And it's just like you're beating your head against the wall. So I'm not anti-church. I just find church boring. And boring. Well, and I guess because I'm so willing to talk about just about anything, or any concepts of what might happen after you die, or maybe where you came from. Or I often thought, is your soul contained within your skin, or is your soul outside of you, and it's just using your physical body to interact on earth, to learn its lessons or whatever? So and did God, when they say God created us in his image, being God looks like me sitting somewhere on a throne, or did he create our soul in his image, not our human form in his image? And I think about a lot of weird shit. But so when I go to church, and nothing against you or any church, but if you go to a Methodist church, or you go to a Catholic church, or you go to your church, it's laid out, like the whole year is laid out on, I guess, the Christian calendar. So on the 12th Sunday after Easter, you're going to talk about this. And that's what your people expect. And that's what you have to do, but to me, that gets like mundane as heck. And so, And I don't know. I mean, I think the lesson you're trying to teach is a lesson that I think people need to understand that, you know, you got to be nice to each other. And you don't earn your way anywhere. When I was where I wasn't a church attender. I mean, I like to think I behaved myself, but I just think that it doesn't matter how nice you are, or if you kill somebody, but I even then, I don't think that you're doomed to hell or doomed to anywhere. Because I think there's way more than what anybody can imagine is of this earth.
Right.
And you know.
You asked for it.
Go right ahead.
You asked for it.
Well, he did have a question.
Well, no, you experienced with hospice and talking to the family and, you know, helping them through the process, and that being, you know, a good thing, and you feel good about that. You know, my world was just the opposite. When we had to go tell a parent their kid was killed in a crash, it was immediate. It was a shock, and it was horrible. You know, because they obviously didn't know that's coming, and that just, it was every time it sucked.
Yeah,
there was no, and at the police department, they were very good at having a good structure. Okay, within the department, we have chaplains on call. So, and the chaplains primarily are there for us and our mental health. We use them quite often to do help with notifications, and because we were so busy that as much as now I told you you just lost a family member, I'm going to walk out the door and take the next call because they're waiting for me.
Right.
And it was a really good transition that the pastor could stay there and kind of walk them through what's next.
Right.
You know, can we contact somebody for you? And I'll stay with you until that person, whether it be church affiliated or a friend, or that's going to help you through this. And so we were really lucky, but my experience was never.
No,
it was never good.
No, I
can
believe that.
It was horrible.
I don't envy that. In fact, when I get a call in the middle of the night from my triage to say so and so passed at this facility, you know, sometimes I have to go.
Yeah.
If family goes, a lot of times family just at a nursing home, they just don't go anymore. But if they do, I'll go. But if they don't, they want me to call the family. But our job is not, as hospice, it's not our job to notify them that they're loved ones.
I wouldn't
The facility does that. Yeah. But I always want to make sure before I'm calling their daughter, did they get this phone call?
Right. You don't want to,
because I don't want to be you.
No,
that's still a tough place. That's a tough place to be in. Very difficult. I've done that a few times.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So it's not an easy thing at all.
No, and I couldn't do, you know, the hospice that's great that people like you're able to do that. You know, we have Karen Morrison is a good friend of ours, and she helps with hospice in the York end of the world, and she's great. She's a great personality for that. One of the friends, his wife works for hospice, and she's perfect. She was a nurse and transitioned into there, and it's a great move. So there's special people out there like you that can do it, and that's not me. That's not me.
Well, it's special to be, although I know it's only one of many things as a police officer, but I'm sure it's not anything they've trained you for, but it's special to know that you got to, you know, to walk and make those
you got to do it.
You door. Gosh, that's just
because you just left the body. You know,
exactly.
You didn't know him.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, you might be doing the autopsy the next day or whatever, so you'll get to know him in a different way.
Yeah.
But so it really wasn't a question.
No.
Expansion.
No. That was great. But your real question that came up last week.
Yeah. So
long.
And that was, and I really never gave it. You guys were talking about it, and I thought about it in the last week. I thought, well, that's really got my head scratching. Like, you know what? As growing up in a Lutheran church, sure, there was pictures of Jesus. He's white with a ponytail and long hair. But then you guys brought it like, well, he was born in the Middle East,
right? So he'd be a lot more olive skin color.
Yeah,
than
right.
he would
He
be
wouldn't.
right.
He
And
would
he's
be, and if he was white in that area, that
He would stand out.
yeah,
He would look weird.
yeah.
it wouldn't be natural like it would. So
Yeah.
that was it's like, well, wait a minute, like yeah.
So it has
why are the
everything
pictures
most likely
all
to
white?
do with the fact that Lutheran UCC well, let's start with Protestantism and say like, okay, we're all part of the Protestant movement back in the 1500s, which is also the same time that the Renaissance and all that stuff was going on. So you got Michelangelo and those
Yeah.
kind of people doing paintings, and where are they? They're in Europe. Who's in Europe? A bunch of white people.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
so
okay.
when you're going to depict Jesus, you're going to depict him, you're going to use
But-
models, and it's those people. So now, I mean, Catholic churches have a white Jesus also. A lot of it just has to do with how people began to image and portray Jesus in an artistic form. And most of that stuff really primarily took off and developed in the Western European world. So it's
So when
kind
he
of
was
all
depicted
white.
on paper, it was depicted by the people that were creating the pictures in their world.
In their
Right.
world.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay, so that makes more
I
sense.
mean, you
So
I'm
they
sure-
basically created Jesus in their image.
yeah.
It's
right.
so if you like Google images of Jesus,
You do see a ton of
you're going to
difference.
see different ones. You're going
Yeah.
to see, Asian. You're going to see African American. You're going to see all sorts of. Because how did somebody once say, God created us in His image, and we turn around and did the favor back to Him by imagining Him in our image.
Mhm.
So we've all kind of made God fit what we want God to be. That's what's tough about God.
Right.
Like you
Because
just said, God is
he's
just,
not a person.
Yeah.
He's
So
not.
you're right. The church is always going to be limited. It's always going to be limited to where it is, who's in that particular setting, and that's going to be a part of the problem.
Well, and it's like you have in Christianity alone, you have the Methodist, you have UCC, you have Mennonite, you have Amish.
100.
So, and they all have their own little, I mean, their ultimate belief is probably very much similar, but they all have their own ways of, we can't drive a car,
Right,
or you got to do this, or you don't eat meat on a Friday.
yeah.
And in my mind, like if only one of them is right, heaven ain't a whole very populated.
No.
You know what I mean? So, and the other thing I think about is, I honest to God don't think God cares if you drive a car, if you eat fish. I don't think, I think that's rules that were made to control groups of people.
Mhm.
And
In a lot of ways, that's what religion is.
Yeah,
Religion
yeah,
is
religion
part of the order, of the
is
order system.
right.
Definitely orders any culture, any society. It's part of doing that, and it has a basis. Most of the time, it has a basis on something, some sense of God, and something of a supernatural nature. But it's taken then and bottled, so to speak, to kind of control the people that are around there. Just what Karl Marx said was, religion is the opiate of the people.
Mhm.
So it's used to kind of keep people kind of
keep
control,
in line,
right, yeah.
like in line.
Yeah.
Based on, all right, I might want to go do this, but if I do, I might not go to heaven.
Right. So the in line is based on a belief that the God you believe in is going to have a problem with you if you go outside of those lines. So we're going to help keep you in good with God by keeping you in good with these lines. So there's typically good intentions. It's just, again, people just mix up God with their own stuff. So before you know it, well, God looks a whole lot like, God looks a whole lot like the Republican Party, or God looks a whole lot like the Democratic Party, or God looks a whole lot like, Osama bin Laden, or whatever.
Yeah.
The lines that we say God's after look pretty similar. How did that happen? And that's just because we've turned God into our image.
Right.
Well, and we're going to be interviewing an ex-Amish. Okay.
Oh, that'll be great.
And that's a question for me was, okay, so were you, as you were brought up in Amish, do you believe that you guys your group will go to heaven because you followed the rules, okay? Before he left. Does that mean nobody else goes?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you? It keeps. Yeah, I understand it keeps you in line, but are they also teaching like you guys are the only ones that are going?
Well, it often does. It often does. Definitely.
And again, then you get this one group of I'm not going to pick on them, but let's say Mennonites or Amish that decide, okay, we're pretty good with most of this, but we'd like to be able to do a little bit more of this, and then they just form their own little group and become another sect or whatever you want to call it.
And there's so many of them out there that do that, like, and not Mennonite in general. Like, well, there's somebody who is very boisterous and can, I don't want to say control people, but is enthusiastic and like, well, let's
charismatic.
That's the word. And come with me, and we'll go rent a building over here, and we'll create our own using some of this stuff and some of this stuff, and it's kind of. So one of the other questions that came up last week that in his infinite theories was, okay, we believe in God, right? Okay, that's our world here. Aliens in another galaxy theoretically would believe in the same thing if you believe that God's in control of
the whole universe,
everything.
Yeah.
Oh,
you remember discussing that last week?
Yeah. Or I spoke of
conversation with veterinarian.
No, this wasn't veterinarian. This was
I thought
it was Anna Ruth who was on for her second time. So there was no topic.
And she did a great job.
Quickly, but she was as far out there as me.
Oh yeah,
maybe more.
Well, and that's why there's a little less wrong.
Yeah. But like I and anything I say is not necessarily my belief. It's just things I think about.
Sure.
I don't know necessarily what's right and what's wrong, but okay, so there's God out there, a thing, and he has people working under him, angels, star people, whatever, who some of them were assigned to come here and create humans, however they did it, and probably go somewhere else and create humans. And like maybe there was even different, I'm going to say races of these, and maybe that's why we have different races on Earth. And also maybe the reason that we can't all get along is because different angels or something created different groups of us, and maybe they didn't get along. And also like Jesus, he was somehow created without sex on Earth, and obviously he had whoever's plan it was, he had to look very similar to people he was around, or he would have not fit in. He certainly couldn't have spread a message if he had blue skin, or he probably would have got killed right off the bat. So however Jesus was conceived, the plan was that he looks like the people he lives with. He may have had way more power in healing, in whatever, but he had to look like them people.
Sure.
So, I mean, here's another thing. I don't want to forget to say this. And people, I almost fear saying this because I'm going to look like, but when Jesus was betrayed by Judas, and everybody hates Judas, it's a bad thing to be Judas. But if Judas didn't do what he did, then Christ wouldn't have been killed,
right,
and there would be no Christianity.
Right.
He basically fulfilled prophecy. So he himself isn't really he had to do what he did in order for the prophecy to be fulfilled. That's why he was there.
Right.
So, everybody that's, he was, he was dying, but he had to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
That was, watch your back on the Ides of March. And
that would be Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
Oh,
Not
I got
Judas,
it.
the guy that betrayed Jesus,
Sorry.
but
Just,
I got
that's
it
okay.
confused,
They
yes.
aren't too far
But-
apart.
but they're doing the same.
It's the same concept.
Yes.
Betrayal.
right.
Betrayal.
Yeah.
And I think that's a commonly posed question by people who are very thoughtful of the whole
Right.
Christian story and
right.
the whole Christian message is like that. So you just had to do that. So why is he a bad guy? You know, exactly. He fulfilled prophecy, and from another perspective, a way to look at Judas in this account is the badness or wrongness of him is that he represents that common betrayal we all have in us,
Right.
to go against
Right.
God or against
To
Jesus.
throw somebody else under the bus,
Right.
for your own benefit.
Right. I mean, what from my perspective, and there's lots of different theories, I suppose you could say, but what's always been what I've leaned on when it comes to Judas is Judas was impatient. He believed Jesus was coming to start a revolution to bring Israel out from under Rome's thumb and get them back into this power. You know, and that's what lots of people thought Jesus was going to do.
Right.
You know, that's when he comes into the Jerusalem on a donkey. People are, this is a king
Right.
that's coming in. And Judas, along with probably most of the disciples, thought that's what they're in for.
Right.
Judas was getting impatient. So he's like, I'm going to push the envelope. If I can get some guys to come out here and stand up to Jesus, maybe he'll finally call down his heavenly host.
Right.
And we'll have
Maybe.
fight.
Yeah. Then we'll see what he's made
So-
of. He'll save his own
Right.
life,
Which
which
puts
will
him in
benefit all us.
exactly. Which puts Judas in a little better light because he had that in mind, and most of us would. But it also goes again to that point that we as humans kind of want to dictate even what God does, and we want to say that this way of power and might and just me being in
Right.
charge is still
Right.
most important. And so Judas becomes kind of that's where the betrayal is. That's what puts Jesus on the cross, is that constant part on our part as humans of constantly kind of trying to take things like salvation and grace and all that stuff and put it into our way of thinking about it.
Right.
Which again then goes back to your story or your idea of religion. We start creating religions to try to control.
Well, either to control or to give. If enough people decide, hey, let's drive a car instead of not drive a car, but we'll stick with everything else. And now you got another branch. And so it basically is all created either by small groups of people moving on or single people wanting to control a large group of people.
Yeah.
And follow. And the only way they can get people to follow their rules is probably two ways: pay them off constantly or threaten them with the afterlife of hell.
Yes.
And so they're ruled by fear, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Branch Davidian.
Branch Davidian was a good
Yeah.
example. Jim Jones,
Yes.
Was a
Yeah.
typical example most people use. So, I think we need to always be mindful of for lack of a better word, the mystery of God and the greatness of God that's just beyond.
Well, and that's
if
a big
believe
problem.
there's
We
God,
can't comprehend what
we
that
cannot
is.
comprehend God. So, from a Christian perspective, and I'm a Christian, and I'm not one of those kind of Christians who says, all the Muslims are going to hell, all the Jews are going to hell because they don't believe. I'm a Christian, so I have come into a sense of God through Jesus, and I believe, from my experience and my studies and all that is a valid way to kind of have a relationship with this God who's just so much beyond anything I can comprehend.
Right.
I can comprehend enough of what I believe God wanted me as a human to understand by showing me it in Jesus Christ. So for me, that's what Jesus becomes. Jesus becomes God as one of us. So we kind of have a bit of a grasp on God.
Right.
knowing, trying to keep mindful that God is even kind of bigger than that. But all that we really kind of need is Jesus, is looking at it from Jesus' perspective. And for Jesus, he said, you take your 1,000-page Bible that's this thick that you never read because it's too boring or too irrelevant or too many names I can't pronounce or whatever. So I don't read it. But Jesus says, in a way, Jesus says, you don't have to worry about reading that. Here's what it's all about. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And if you're about those things, you're in good shape.
Yeah.
So, we can get lost, and nothing wrong with getting lost in all the thoughts of the universe and how God's beyond our comprehension and all that, and who goes to heaven, who goes to hell, and should I drive a car, shouldn't I? When in the end of it all, and I find this as a hospice person, in the end of it all, as they always say, nobody's going to sit there and say, I should have worked more, I should have bought this car. They're going to look at the people who are standing around their bedside and think, if anything, I should have spent more time with you. So that leads me into one thing I wanted to say.
That's why you're a guest.
But I wanted to make sure. So I think, and this is not because I think this needs to be said. So you, Kelly Fosnock, to me, and I'm not blowing smoke, I got nothing to get from you. You're not going to give me any money or anything,
No, because I don't have money.
You don't have any money. You're not going to get me to win trivia if I just say these nice things about you. But I do want to say this about you. And
I hope our audio is working.
I hope it is. Make sure it's working. Is it working?
Yeah.
So, to me, you've come to, in many ways, epitomize what I think it's all supposed to be about. You have, over the years, it's all about relationships.
Yeah, it is.
Life. Love the Lord your God, neighbor as self. That's relationship.
Right.
I always like to tell. I like to tell this when I'm married couples, and about when God created humans. This to me is one of the most fascinating things in the Bible. If you believe in the Bible, if you believe God is God, all that stuff. It says God made everything in 6 days and rested on the seventh. I don't know what you think about what a day is. But at the end of those days, God said, it's good. What I did was good. This is God. God is good. He makes human. And then it says, God says, it is not good that I. So just stop there for a second. This is God saying, I did something that's not good.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
He says, it's not good that I created the man alone. So I'm going to make a partner for him. So God's saying, it's not good that we should ever be outside of a relationship with each other. Because understand, when God made Adam in that story, Adam wasn't alone. He had God. So we're not even supposed to just rely on me and God can get through this. God says it's not good that me and you get through this. You need somebody else. Now, we use that passage to then talk about marriage, right? But it's about, Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor as yourself. You, even so much in life, whether people get it or not, you go from, place to place. You do trivia, you do all these things because of people. Because you value people.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to a bar if I was the only guy sitting there.
Sometimes you are, and you show us who your friends are.
Well, right. Yeah, actually, most of the time I am.
And that sounds so simple. But honestly, being in relationships and being willing to get involved or interact with people.
Right.
That's what it's all about.
Whether I believe what they believe or whether they think I'm a nut or whatever. Right. But to be able to interact. And honestly, that's why I like bars, because people are very much less judgmental than a lot of other places.
Sure.
and you can sit there and I can get to know Paul, and
Yeah.
you know, he can believe what he wants, and he
Mhm.
can make an ass out of me, and I don't really care. But we're still friends at the end of the day.
Here's the problem that happens with all of us, and not so much maybe at a bar.
Right.
Happens at a church. It happens in the grocery store. It happens everywhere, most everywhere else. We all say to each other this: "Hey, how's it going?" While we're doing what?
Yeah.
We're never actually waiting for an answer.
Yeah. Or sitting down and really getting to know somebody.
At a bar, you might sit there and start to talk to somebody. I went to concerts on Tuesday night and Wednesday night with my son, and we go early because I want to be up against the rail.
I saw you were in the mosh pit. I saw you in the mosh pit.
58-year-old guy in the mosh pit with a bunch of 20 and 30 something. But I got there early, and my wife and I have done this over the years with other bigger concerts where we've gone early because we want to get up front because it's kind of exciting, but you got to go real early. And you meet all these other interesting people.
That's why I go to trivia early.
Yeah.
My wife doesn't understand why I don't just show up at 6:20, plug in my speakers and roll. It's that time before trivia where I get to know all these people.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason I really like trivia. I mean, I like doing it, but it's much more important that I get to know these and they get to know me, which in turn is, I really feel, why I get the crowds I do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I was just some guy that rolled in at the last minute, stood and read a couple questions, rolled at the end, nobody cared.
No.
Nobody would know me.
And you're able to, you're in a, again, let's go back, love God, love neighbor as self. You're able to love yourself, which helps. Because anybody who can, God made a pirate out of iron with a far, and let people just mock that. But they're having fun. They're not making, but to just take that, you're able to do that pretty well. But again, my point is, and I just want to say this just because I think in all of our big kind of metaphysical conversation here about God and the universe, to me, in the end, and this is why I'll kind of hinge myself on Jesus. It's about relationship. It's about and I'll say this. I'm not saying that I do good at that myself. I mean, relationships, nobody's watching this. People suck. I mean, they do. We all kind of have a way of sucking.
I often say I have a shitload of acquaintances. I have very few friends. Right. And I don't mind that. But I know a ton of people. But if I go, I don't need to call somebody and say, hey, let's go. I'll just go do something. And I'll be bound to run into somebody I know. And if I don't, I'll get to know somebody. And I don't really care what they believe, I just sit there and I never was like that. When I was younger, I didn't talk to other people.
I'm glad you said that. I didn't want to say that, but I mean, you've evolved.
I did.
You evolved in that respect.
For good or bad.
I mean, granted, the seed was there. We would hang out at Zinn's Park every night, just hanging out. And the reason we hung out was just talking
because
to
people were there.
People were there, and we're talking to people, and we're hearing about life and all that.
Right.
At that time, we weren't as maybe deep into life, but that's what it takes. We all need people who are willing to stay around when we ask the question, how are you doing? And that's important. And you do that. And that's why I'm saying that's hard work. That's why I'm saying kind of people suck. We all do. We all have our stories, and sometimes it's really hard to sit and listen to each other's stories. But one other thing I've learned about people as a pastor and in hospice is everybody's got an interesting life. Everybody does. Yeah. And if you think you don't, one of the people I was standing in line with for this concert was, I don't even know how old she was, maybe 33, something like that. And she's we're all talking and somebody else said, she said, oh, that's fascinating that you did that. And then we're like, well, what did you do? Well, I'm now some kind of medical on computers, but she said, I was a skydiving instructor. But I don't like to talk about it. Why don't you like to talk about that? Right. Nobody here is a skydiving instructor. That's fascinating. Yeah, well, I've done like 1,000, but it's no big deal. But no, that is a big deal. That is fascinating. But I find that with people all the time, their lives, even if they're just some 90-year-old guy who grew up all his life and lived all his life in Pine Grove, What did I ever do? But if you sit and listen, he's got some pretty interesting stories, and just something that you can walk away and just be reminded people are worthwhile. People are fascinating.
Well, and the other thing, it always said Jesus hung out with the lepers and he didn't just hang out with a couple guys who he thought were as good as he was,
right,
and didn't want to get in trouble. He hung out with the dregs of society.
He did.
And I think too many people forget that, and they think, oh, look at that he looks homeless. I'd rather not get involved with that dude. But that dude might be real interesting. And he might only look the way he does because he wants to look that way. Yeah.
Most of the time, a lot of people that are on the margins are often there's lots of reasons, but one thing that helps them is when somebody takes an interest in it, because nobody has. That's usually why you end up.
I remember one time walking to Black Forest, and at the red light at Grandview Avenue, right at the deck there, I ran into two guys and I'm going to say they were homeless. And I'm just assuming, but they had stuff with them. And I stood there and I talked to them. And honest God, like, people said, well, weren't you afraid? He said, well, no. And they honestly carried, like, I thought they actually, we talked a little bit, not about a lot of anything, but I think they were happy that somebody just didn't blow them off.
Right.
That's.
I remember reading a book about two young guys who did this experiment. They became homeless for like a period of time across the country, and they had the means had they wanted, but they decided not to do anything, and they lived among the homeless. And in this account, I'll always remember this guy said the thing that he found to be the most important thing that anybody did for him in that whole period of time. Yes, people will get him a meal sometimes. Yes, people might give him some money or whatever. But he said it was when people looked him in the eye and said hi or talked to him. Looked him in the eye. He said most people would never look us in the eye because they're like homeless. So again, I guess all I'm trying to say is, to me, that's what it's about. That's what, to me, the Christian faith is about. That's what church is supposed to be about. Church stinks at it because we just get caught up in all the religion, all the bureaucracy, all other stuff. So for me, it's just reminding people wherever you're at. And I've openly said this frequently in sermons, different times. I mean, I'm the first guy. Sometimes I'll see somebody down at the end of the grocery aisle, and I'm like, I'm going the other way. I know I'm running into that. I'm going to hear this. And I've done that many times, but I've also sometimes just bit the bullet, and it was probably, the most important conversation I had that week that was necessary.
Right.
So you just do a great job of that, coming up with this idea, just to bring people in, but even to come up with this and to bring people in, just I think that's just great. So I just want to make sure people understand who you are.
All right. Well, I appreciate that.
And I like hanging out with him because of that.
Yeah.
He doesn't expect anything. He doesn't like, hey, can you help me do 50 million things? No, it's just hang out and talk. And that's how this evolved. Because we'll sit there and talk for a long time about nothing sometimes, and we just enjoy his company. And you got to love his shirt.
Well, we discussed rock and roll. I had to wear it.
Yeah, rock on.
Good job.
All right, we'll end it there. We were a little overtime. Hopefully, whatever the sound issue wasn't too bad, or corrected itself. And I'd like to thank Brad for coming out. We do have a guest the next 2 weeks, but then after that, we're open. So if you're into sitting in that seat, get a hold of us. And I think at some point after he retires, we're going to bring him back, and we're going to talk about some stuff that I didn't really want to get into because I just thought maybe he isn't proper with him still being behind the altar. But
when I retire, are you guys going to still be doing this in a few years? I'm getting old, but not quite there.
Well, but yeah, we'll probably do it. Anyway, thanks for coming. Hopefully everything went well, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Absolutely. That was fun. Thanks for picking my brain.